yashmer Shabbat el yishmereni, ki yashmer Shabbat el yishmereni, oti lo me'at beno veni, oti lo me'at beno veni, ki yashmer Shabbat el yishmereni, ki yashmer Shabbat el yishmereni, oti lo me'at beno veni, oti lo me'at beno veni.
Shabbat Shalom. As are many in this challenging time, you see that we have retreated back to our basement, back to the safety of leading services with my quarantine buddy, and I hope that you are making choices to stay safe during this challenging rise and uptick in COVID cases. But this Shabbat, we are not alone. We join you in the virtual space. In a moment, we'll hear from Rabbi Lockett immediately following our service. Don't go anywhere when it ends. We have Andres Bakoini, the head of the Jewish Funders Network, for a fascinating look at how COVID-19 is impacting the Jewish world. And we are excited to bring in with us this evening Tim Brogdon. Tim, how you doing this evening?
I am happy to be in the basement again with you.
I'm excited from your basement to mine. And I'm in love with your Hine Matov, and I wasn't willing to let it go.
Well, I'm very happy to present that.
Well, thank you.
Ma yafe hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafe hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Ma yafe hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafe hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Hine matov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. Ma yafe hayom, Shabbat Shalom. Ma yafe hayom, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to have you with us and throughout our service as we now invite Rabbi Jessica Lockett to lead us on pages 2 and 5, the blessing for the candles and over the sweetness of Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'chad likner shel Shabbat. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei bariah gafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu. Shabbat kachom yahava uvratzot hichilanu. זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה ומקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים. בשבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. Shabbat Shalom.
We continue now, page 13, words, song of Psalm 96.
Shivu l'Adonai kol haaretz, Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. Sing unto God all the earth a new song. I will sing unto God a new song. Sing unto God and we'll all sing along all the earth a new song unto God. Shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash. I will sing unto God a new song.
It is such a pleasure to join you this Shabbat in sacred community. Shabbat Shalom, Rachel and Tony and Amy, Catherine. Hi, Mom. Melissa, it is a pleasure to pray with you all as we continue our words of welcoming, words of Lecha Dodi, welcoming the Sabbath itself to join us, pages 20 and 21.
Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. 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 Shamor v'zachor v'ribor echad, Yishmiyanu el ha'miyuchad, Adonai echad u'shmo echad, L'shem u'tiferet v'lit hilah, Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Likat Shabbat lechu v'necha, ki mikor bracha, merosh mikedem nesucha, sof maaseh b'machshvat tchila. Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri, toreri, ki v'orech kumi ori, uri shir daberi, kivod Adonai alayich nigla. Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom atet bala, gam b'simcha uv'tzola, toch emunei hamsegula. Boi chala, lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi likat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela.
We continue our words of welcome, our words of greeting. Beth and Matt and Ruth Schwartz, a pleasure. Tracy and Mike, Iris and Chris It is a pleasure to pray with you this Shabbat as we welcome God's ministering angels to be with us in peace this day. Page 24.
Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu Nile Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Tzedchem L'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
And on the following page, Yitkadah v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah.
Amen.
V'amad yivracher tevyamlich malchutei. B'cha yechonu v'yomechon. Uv'chayedecho beit Yisrael. Ba'gala, ba'gala. Uvizman kariv v'imevru. Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabbah mevorach. Le'alam olam me'almaya. Yivarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yithalal shemir kudusha B'richu le'lam imcho birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran be'alma v'yimeru. Amen. And as we bring Tim back with us, it is, Tim, we have a couple of comments. Robin says that she's singing with you this evening. And just as I said, thanks to my mom, so too do you get to say Shabbat Shalom to Karen, who is joining us. It is good to see you as well. As we continue now, page 28, our Baruch Hu praise.
Ya la 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 la. Ya da 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 da. Ya da 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 ya da 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 da. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya da 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 da. Malchu et Adonai HaMevorach Baruch Adonai HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed.
On the top now of page 31 in the English, praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Your wisdom sets the way on which time and season glide. Your breath guides the sail of the stars. Creator of the tide of time and light, you guide the current of day into night. As heaven spans to infinity, you set its course for eternity. Praise to you, Adonai, our God, from whom the evening flows. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim. And in the English on page 33, as you taught Torah to those whose names I bear, teach me Torah too. Its mystery beckons, yet I struggle with its truth. You meant Torah for me. Did you mean the struggle for me too? Don't let me struggle alone. Help me to understand, to be wise, to listen, to know. Lead me into the mystery. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael. as we continue on pages 34 and 35, the watchwords of our faith, Shema Yisrael, we rise in our place, or we rise in spirit.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leolam Vahed. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto, Leolam Vahed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Page 36. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'otecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha uv'lechtecha b'derech uv'shokbecha v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha uv'yisharecha למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם לאלוהים אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
On page 39 in the English, standing on the parted shore of history, we still believe what we were taught before ever we stood at Sinai's foot, that wherever we go it is eternally Egypt, that there is a better place, a promised land, that the winding way to that promise passes through the wilderness, that there is no way to get from here to there except by joining hands, marching together, and perhaps singing words of Mi Chamocha found on page 40.
Bim bam bam bim bim bam bim bam bam bim bam bim bam bam bim bim bam 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 bim bam mihi chamocha elim Adonai mihi kamocha nedar b'kodesh norat ilot osefele norat ilot osefele bam bam bim bim bam 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 bim bam bim bam bam bim bim bam 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 bim bam malchucha vahuvanecha bohukei ayam lifnei Moshe Miriam Zeli Amru Adonai Imlok Leolam Vaed Bim bam bam bim bim bam bim bam bam bim bam bim bam bam bim bim bam bim bam bam bim bam.
It is a mouthful to fit those matriarchs into our prayers, and yet on this day of Transgender Day of Remembrance, we think of all of those who haven't found their place in the traditional Jewish community, and we welcome them, even if it takes our tongues a little bit of getting used to. We can figure this out, and I'm grateful to you, Tim, for fighting along with us to make that happen.
I'm trying. I'm gonna get it.
I love it. On page 42, we find words of Hashkivenu asking for God's shelter of peace, God's shelter of protection over all in this troubled world.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Leshalom Amidenu Melcheinu Lechayim Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Leshalom Amidenu Shomreinu Lechayim Ushmo Zetenu Uhoenu L'chaim Ushalom Me'ata Ad Olam Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Leshalom V'Abidenu Shomreinu L'chaim Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Leshalom V'Abidenu Shomreinu L'chaim.
Robin Hausman, I agree with you when you say it is so comforting to hear from so many in this community. Though we can't be together in person, we are grateful to be connected in this sacred space, sharing the experience of bringing in Shabbat together. We're cognizant that Shabbat has been our gift throughout the ages, and with words of Vishamru, we recognize it as a covenant that sustains us for all time. We are on page 44.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורתם בבית עולם, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם בבית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל עוד היא לעולם, עוד היא לעולם, עוד היא לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם בברית עולם. כי 6 ימים עשה אדוני, עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם בברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת ונפש, שבת ונפש, שבת ונפש, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורתם בברית עולם.
Shabbat Shalom to you, Joyce and Mel and Claire. We say hey to you as well. And of course, Alan and Tara, Addie and Noah, it is a pleasure to pray with you as we begin the central portion of our worship service this evening, our Shabbat Amidah.
Thought has blown the marketplace away. There is a song on the wind, joy in the trees. Shabbat arrives in the world, scattering a song in the silence of the night, and eternity utters a day. Eternity utters a day.
La תיתך, ופי יגיד תהילתך. עיני שפתי תיתך, ופי יגיד תהילתך. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו ואהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם. מחכה חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בגבורות, ומדו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. And may all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. This section of our service concludes with words of Shalom Rav, a prayer asking for God's peace on us and on all in this world.
Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atom melech Adon lechol hashalom. Ki atom melech Adon lechol hashalom. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. V'tov b'necha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol עת ובכל שעה משלומך. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
I'm so glad you are with us this Shabbat. There isn't going to be a sermon that is a part of our service tonight, but indeed immediately following the conclusion, we are excited to welcome the president and the CEO of the Jewish Funders Network, Andres Bokoini. Andres, I'm so grateful you are joining us this evening. And when our service concludes, I will add you to our program as well for the chance to discuss, the chance to dialogue, the chance to see what you're seeing about how COVID-19 is impacting the Jewish world. COVID-19 is impacting so many of us as well as it's impacting our institutions. And with broken hearts, we think of those who are suffering this Shabbat, those who are suffering from ailments of mind, of body, of spirit. If you're comfortable doing so, I invite you to share those of whom you are thinking for Misha Berach Lecholim in the chat box, that we might all concert our efforts and our prayers on their behalf, or invite you to call them to name at this time. Call them to mind, their names to mind at this time, as we continue on page 253.
Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor HaBracha Limahotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Amen. Misha Berach Imahotenu Mekor HaBracha Avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Amen.
As I mentioned, we're excited to welcome Andres Bokoini in but a few moments, and I'm so glad you are with us, Andres, as we continue on the bottom of page 282, words of Aleinu Leshabeach, and we invite you to join with us.
Aleinu Leshabeach Ladon HaKol, Latet Gidula B'Tzer Breshit, Shelo Asanu K'goyei HaRatzot, V'lo Samanu K'mishpachot Ha'adama, Shelo Sam Chalkenu Kahem, V'gohor Aleinu K'chol Hamonam, V'anachnu Korim, U'mishtachavim U'modim, Lifnei Melech, Malchei HaMlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz. Bayom hahu yihye Adonai echad. U'shemo echad.
Yesh kochavim shoram magia artsa rak kasher hem atzmam avdu ve'inam. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light long after the star itself is gone. And so too, perhaps it is with those whom we have loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. The stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. And indeed, on this Shabbat, we do remember those taken from our congregational family in recent days and at this time in years past. We mourn the loss of Paul E. Fitting, who is laid to rest in recent days, and observe the period of Shloshim for Betty Friedman Diskin, J. Peter Fried, and Anne Winkelstein. This Shabbat, we mark the yahrzeit, the commemoration of the passing of Jean Adolphi, Evelyn Berger, Myron Bleiberg, Edward J. Bremen, Rosalind Stein Fivish, Joseph Freeman, Milton W. Gollum, Harry Guggenheim, Abe Gural, Jacob Kaufman, Alice McHaw Kelly, Victor Levine, Arnold Liebenson, Richard Maidman, Jeannie M. Marple, David J. Neustadt, Louise Parker, Bertha Peresman, Milton O. Peresman, Benjamin Pisetsky, Bessie Popkin, Louis Reznikoff, Dora Rosen, Peter Rosen, Nettie Sasnow, Richard Seawald, Cheryl Turoff, Elka Weisman, Naomi Vatz, and Margaret Garfinkel Weiner. We add to those our congregational family remembers this Shabbat, those of your loved ones, those for whom you are saying Kaddish Yatom, our mourner's Kaddish. And I offer an apology for those names that I have mispronounced. I invite you to say those names aloud, that the memories might come flooding back as we join as one community, page 294. Yit Gadal V'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah V'Alma Divrach Hirutei V'Yamlich Malchutei V'Chayechon V'Yomechon V'Chaye Dechol Beit Yisrael Bagala V'Zman Kariv V'Imru Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam L'Amei Amaya Yitbarach V'Yishabach V'Yitpa'ar V'Yitramam V'Yitnaseh V'Yithadar V'Yitalev V'Yitalal Shemei D'Kudusha V'Richu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata Tushbechata V'Nechamata Damiran Belma V'Imru Amen. Yehi Shalama Rabba Min Shemaya V'Chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. Osei Shalom B'Mramav Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'Imru Amen. May God, who makes peace in the highest of heavens, make peace for us and for all who mourn this Shabbat. And together we say, Amen. All right, Tim, can I bring you back in? It is a pleasure to pray with you this Shabbat, to be enriched by your musical stylings and a favorite version of Oseh Shalom.
Oseh Shalom Bimroma Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel Ve'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimroma Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel Ve'imru Amen. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la Oseh Shalom Bimroma Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael Ve'al Kol Yoshvei Tevel Ve'imru Amen. Ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la ya la 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 ya la 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 ya la la ya la 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 ya la la ya la la ya la la.
Tim,
Shabbat Shalom.
I am grateful. Shabbat Shalom to you as well. And Emily, I am grateful to you for helping to lead this service. We have a number of exciting services coming up. As I've mentioned, I hope you'll stick with us this evening as we hear from Andres Spokojny in just one moment. Next week, we are blessed to have song leader Orrin Reynolds and HUC JIR student Rabbi Shoshana Nambi Shoshana from the Abu Daya group of Jews in Uganda will be sharing her story, as well as sharing words of Torah the following week. Alana Jagoda Kay, a song leader from the West Coast. So many reasons to stick with us on Shabbat, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to pray with you all. All right, and now it is time to see if our technology is working, as I'm excited to bring into our service Andres Spokojny, who is the president and CEO of the Jewish Funders Network. How are you doing this evening?
Very good. Shabbat Shalom. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you perfectly. Shabbat Shalom. I'm so
Shabbat
glad
Shalom.
you're with us. And for
Big
everyone
pleasure.
who is joining us, I hope you will feel free to chime in with questions throughout our time this evening. I'm going to start us off with a few questions, but tonight is really meant to be interactive, a chance to learn together. So where are you right now? Where are you physically?
In Brooklyn, New York, and this is one of the beauties of this. And the beauties, I mean, it's a terrible time, but it's one of the silver linings is that I'm here in New York and I can join you guys for Shabbat in Pittsburgh, and we are discovering a new form of connectivity. So that probably is one of the silver linings that we should retain as we hopefully come out of this pandemic.
Absolutely. So I want to jump right in for those who are with us this evening, and I'm excited that we haven't lost anyone from our Shabbat service. We have more than 150 people from Temple Emmanuel who are with you in this virtual room. You have written extensively that this is, in many ways, the rainy day that funders have been saving for. What are you seeing more globally? Take us outside of Pittsburgh for a moment. What are you seeing from Jewish synagogues and camps and JCCs? Is the Jewish world wrestling with COVID-19?
Great. So first of all, as a way of introduction, I would say that for folks that don't know, I ran an organization called the Jewish Funders Network, which is as the name says, a network that gathers philanthropists, funders, and by funders we mean independent philanthropies, givers of all sorts, institutional foundations, and the like. So that gives me sort of a balcony view of the philanthropic field, right? Like I know what funders are doing, where they are investing in normal times, and especially now in times of COVID. So this is, as you had said, Rabbi, this is the rainy day. And thankfully, philanthropists and donors realized that that's the case. This is new. I mean, it sounds obvious, right? Like there's a big crisis and people, and funders step up. It didn't happen in the past recession. During 2008, giving decreased by 13% in North America in general, by 18% in the Jewish community. And it took many years to get back to pre-recession levels. This is not what happened in this crisis. Thanks God. People really stepped up. And there was a fear at the beginning of a domino effect, right? With the conversations we were having back in April was, this is going to be a catastrophe. All the organizations in the Jewish community are going to fall one after the other. JCCs won't be able to function, schools won't be able to collect tuition, etc. That scenario, that doomsday scenario did not happen. And because of a mixture of things. First of all, there was government stimulus, which helped. Not enough, but it was something. Then there was, the community stepped up. The philanthropic community stepped up with more giving. And organizations instituted draconian cost-saving measures. They fired people, they furloughed people, they cut tax, they cut costs, etc. But that determined that collapse did not happen. But now I think we're getting in to the long tail of this crisis, and we're gonna see more and more donors in the middle level of giving being affected by the crisis and not being able to support the different organizations that they generally support. One point, and I'll let you ask another question, but one point that people don't really know is that in fact 80% of the GDP of the Jewish community is not donations, is tuitions, membership dues, fees of people that go to the JCC, day school tuitions and the like. When families are affected by the crisis, as they are now, if they can't pay that, there's not enough philanthropic money to cover for that. So ultimately, we will need to figure out a way to keep supporting the Jewish organizations in these cases. The last thing I'm going to say is that the response to COVID had actually a few very good things. Funders became, as you said, Rabbi, more responsive. This is the rainy day, but they also became much more understanding of the realities of the nonprofits. For example, one thing that happened is that funders that used to give monies that were directed, that were designated, you can only use it for A, B, or C, now are giving funds in an unrestricted manner because they realize that nonprofits need flexibility to respond to the needs. That's a welcome change in the way we fund Jewish institutions. Second good thing is that funders are collaborating much more. We all realize that the crisis is very big, and therefore we try as much as we can to operate in coordination. So there were several attempts of creating a more consistent and cohesive and collaborative response to the crisis. The one thing that I don't see much, and I would like to see more, is using the crisis as an opportunity to rethink the Jewish community as a whole. But I guess we're going to talk more about it going forward.
Very much so, and that is part of what drew me to reach out, and I'm so glad that you accepted this invitation among many to be able to think and vision for what is coming in the future. Although talk of membership model is long overdue in the synagogue world, even if it still strikes fear in our hearts. So I asked this question mainly as an excuse to post on the chat one of the pieces of yours that I've read and that I was enamored with. COVID-19, blip or earthquake? You mentioned 2008 was a challenge, but then it receded. How do you see this in the long term?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions we face, and frankly, the answer depends pretty much on us. I mean, I think that what happened in the first phase of the response to the crisis, we treat it mostly as a blip. In other words, we try to shore up institutions. Institutions did actually survive, thanks God, but that in a way blinded us to the need for structural reform. There are things that, like what you just mentioned, the membership model, that's long overdue. Like, that's not because of COVID, right? But COVID offers us the opportunity to really think those models in depth. JCCs, a third of the JCCs don't finish in the red every year, right? So the model is in deep need of rethinking. So what I would like to see is that the community takes this opportunity to really think about this as an earthquake. And what do you do after an earthquake? You build back. Not to use a political slogan, you build back better. But in this context, better doesn't necessarily mean bigger or stronger. After an earthquake, what you do is you build more flexible. Like if you go to Japan, for example, the way they build, the buildings now, they're building on cylinders, so they move, right? So it's more nimble, it's more flexible, and I wonder if we shouldn't do the same exercise in the Jewish community, rather than run in and rush in to save every organization, is to really ask ourselves. And by the way, I'm not saying that's not useful. I want our organizations to be safe, but I also want that there is another layer of conversation that says, wait a minute, this is an opportunity to think about the community we need. The community we have has a lot of inertia. Like there's organizations that are 100 years old that were a response to a specific set of historical circumstances. Now, these circumstances can or cannot be still relevant? We need to ask that question, right? So I think that treating it as an earthquake, if only as an intellectual exercise, allows us to have a deeper thinking in that the one we have. And it's an earthquake, I think, not only in organizational structures, but also in terms of spiritual realities. How people relate to Judaism is going to change. And I guess we're going to be talking more about that. But I would love for people, and I talk about this a lot in my organization, because those are folks that have a lot of influence by virtue of the philanthropy that they give, that the conversation goes beyond the crisis and into a rethinking of what is the structure of community, what we need now, and let's make the mental exercise of imagining that there's nothing here. And so if we need to build it from scratch, how would we build it, right? And probably the answer will be very different than what we're doing now.
Beyond a shadow of a doubt. And again, that's scary to hear, but you're right. We, the Jewish community, are a response to our times. So let's make this a little more personal, or a little more, I guess, professionally personal. You're speaking to a mid-sized suburban congregation in the south suburbs of Pittsburgh that has been going strong and wonderfully for some 70 years. And this is an earthquake where we see changing demographics, we see challenges to people's lives and livelihood. We know what we were doing isn't some wonderful things, but some things that probably need to be revisited. What do you see as the keys to surviving this? When congregations get to build back better, what does that begin to look like?
That's prophecy is a gift that I don't have, but I would tell you from what I see. I think that first of all you need to distinguish between two type of things. First is, what are the things that are specific from COVID, right? Like things that if there wasn't COVID, they wouldn't exist. But then the other question, the really important question is, COVID is an accelerator of things that were there before. In other words, the crisis of the membership model was there before, and COVID accelerates it. And by the way, it's going to get worse because look at me now. I'm not going to my shul around the corner. I'm connecting to you guys, and I shop around, and I can say, well, if every service is on Zoom, why can't I connect to a rabbi in Los Angeles, or San Francisco, or Pittsburgh, for that matter? Right. So then, how that affects my shul, and how that affects would I still pay membership to my shul around the corner? Like, and why? What? In other words,
interrupt to say to everybody listening, the answer to that question is yes. You know where to.
The answer of that question. The answer of the question is yes, but my synagogue will need to articulate what's the unique value that can give me now that actually I can find, I can listen to, Rabbi Zach's sermons, Zichrono Livracha, right? Like in other words, what is the unique value that my congregation gives me, right? It's going to be, post-COVID, it's going to be the personal contact, the sense of community. I think that my rabbi, she will need to actually not try to compete with the best rabbis in the world, but actually, she is one of them. But my point is, she should be probably a curator of content that can be found everywhere. One of the problems and the opportunities that COVID presents to synagogues, schools, Hebrew schools, etc., is that content gets democratized. Let me tell you this, example. My mother lives in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She would normally go to a museum in Buenos Aires that is really, mediocre, right? Now, today, because everything is on Zoom, she's, visiting the Louvre and the Museo del Prado, and it's going to be hard for her to go back to the little museum in Buenos Aires, right? But on the other hand, that museum can offer her something that the other museums can't. But the question is going to be what, and how do they articulate it, and how the role of that museum changes, right? It's not to show you the 3 paintings we have, but it's how do we curate content from all over the world and help you interact with it and motivate you. And so it is going to be a different job description, I think, for rabbis, for Jewish educators around the world. And so it's going, and for congregations, the community aspect is going to become more and more strong, I think. The other thing I think, and this is not necessarily financial, but spiritual, is that I think that congregations like yours are going to confront people like Jews from the street that are going to be in a quest for meaning, right? So it is going to be a time of seekers, a time of wrestlers. Like every pandemic brings a spiritual reckoning. People ask transcendental questions. People have a brush with death, and they doubt stuff. They ask questions. So you will need to be a home for that process of seeking, for that spiritual quest, and you will need to actually have more of those conversations with your people. And it's not just the rabbi, it's actually the congregation needs to become a welcoming space. And I don't know enough your congregation, I assume you are, but you're going to stress that aspect of being a welcoming space for that spiritual quest. We don't have to be afraid of dealing with spiritual questions, with deep transcendental questions. We've been avoiding them for a long time. I mean, the Jewish community is not very good now in asking those type of questions, because we try to find a common denominator so that nobody gets turned off by whatever the answer to those questions is. So we don't ask the questions at all. But in the post-pandemic world, we need to answer those questions. So I think, to summarize, on the organizational level, you guys will need to, like every congregation in the country, will need to think more in terms of how your membership model works, how you can collaborate with others. Like the world that's going to come after COVID is going to be a world of more collaborations. How are we going to deal with a democratization? How are you going to leverage and use the democratization of content, of high-level content around the world? On the spiritual level, you will need to be prepared for a congregation that is going to be much more, I would say, in a spiritual quest than it is now. And the last point, which is not related to COVID, but actually COVID made it harder, is that we live in times that are highly polarized, right? And it was already easy in the internet era to tune out all the people that you disagree with, right? But now in COVID, it's even easier. You don't have to meet them, right? So, so you're going to need to deal with, to keep the fabric of the community alive in times of very high polarization, political, religious, etc.
It is already something keeping me up at night. And, it was, as we were headed into a high holidays, a Yamim Noraim unlike any other. And let me fanboy out for a moment. I actually quoted the piece you wrote in Tablet Magazine in the early days. One of the quotes that I absolutely loved, where you said, we're confronting the challenges of the 21st century with a spiritual toolbox built for the 19th century. But you also said, and here I want to look at my notes because I found this particularly meaningful, that we need to be investing in Jewish ideas as funders, as a Jewish world, and not just in Jewish infrastructure. And you say, quote, without significant investment in ideas, theology, philosophy, deep existential thinking, we may end up saving institutions, but losing the possibility of meaningful Judaism. I couldn't agree more, and I'd love for you to expand upon that a little bit.
Yes, that's one of my obsessions, and it's counterintuitive, right? Because people are saying, well, you're talking about philosophy and theology, and people are, institutions are in crisis, and they can't make ends meet, and so and you're here talking about theology, but what I think is that's going to be the main challenge. The main challenge going forward, coming out of the pandemic, is going to be about content. It's not going to be about the how. It's going to be about the why, and it's going to be about the what, right? And let me preface that by saying, the way you started the question is, I think that we have an outdated philosophical software. And if we go back in history, if you look at the Jewish community, the intellectual and philosophical scaffolding of the Jewish community was actually created in the early 19th century. Like Reform Judaism, was created in 1810, Chabad in 1814, Conservative Judaism in the 1830s. We have not created a new religious and spiritual ideology in the last 100 years. The last new philosophical system of Judaism was created by Mordechai Kaplan in the 1920s. That's 100 years ago. Now, what we need to understand is that when Reform Judaism was created, when Conservative Judaism was created, it was actually responding to a very specific set of historical circumstances. It was responding to the realities of Jews in Central Europe in the 19th century. Jews were coming out of the shtetl. They're having all sorts of questions about their identity, about how to live their Judaism in an open society, and they came up with these ideas, right? And and with these religious ideas, and they also came up with Zionism, which is a secular ideology. Now we're 200 years later, and the world changed, but we still have that ideological software, and we are not investing enough. We're not giving people the space to come up with new ideologies, with new ideas. Now, there's something about that, and it's the immigrant in me that can see this more clearly than those that were born here. America is not a very conducive place for ideas. Americans are very practical, are very pragmatic. The people we lionize in this society are, entrepreneurs, are folks that, intellectuality is sort of looked down on. Like those are idle pursuits of, self-indulgent, stuff. And it's not a coincidence that actually the Jewish ideologies we use were all from Europe. That we didn't develop any new Jewish theology in North America. It was, Mordechai Kaplan developed it here, but it was mainly he was born in Europe. Heschel was born in Europe. So our community is not conducive, and our society is not conducive to that. But we need it. We need it badly because as I said before, I think that the main challenge is not organizational, is theological, is philosophical. We are in a moment in history in which, and forget about COVID. This was happening before COVID too. Like we're in a time in which human condition is changing drastically. Like we live in a time in which individuals are hyper empowered. We have more freedom and more power than we've ever had as individuals in our lives. In human history, the structure of the society is changing. The dimension of the collective is changing. What does it mean to be a people is changing. What does it mean to be a nation? We're wrestling with that here in the United States, but every country in the world is wrestling with the same question. What does it mean to be a nation today? Right? The question of God. What does it mean? I mean, what is God today? What is free will today? Now that we know that our brains condition us, like, do we have free will? What is consciousness? Now that we have artificial intelligence, what separates the human from the machine? In other words, those are philosophical questions, but they become real, and that's what theology responds to. And we're not thinking about this at all. We're just, going along, inventing more programs that are very good, but the characteristic they have is that they are content light or content free. Think Birthright as an example. And don't get me wrong, I love Birthright. I think it's great. But Birthright is built upon the idea that we're going to lower the content. That's the trip, no strings attached, no big, commitment whatsoever. Take a program like Moishe House. For those of you that don't know it, it's a program that is very popular now, where just young Jews live together in the same house. And the idea is that this creates community. It does, but the program itself has no content, right? So those are amazing programs, but the question is they're not going to be enough if we don't put content in it. And that content has to be relevant to the issues that our society and people face in the 21st century.
And as a synagogue rabbi, it's interesting to hear. I agree with everything you are saying. And I do see our organizations involved, right? If we think of the organization as the tree, one can only get so far out on that branch before either the branch breaks or the people hugging the base of the tree start trying to saw the branch off. Right? And so while there are many catalysts and need for innovation, there are also a tremendous inertia keeping the models that are currently working, even if they're working less well every successive day.
Let me give you an example. I live in France, and France, when I was living there was the cellular revolution, right? So France was trying to change its phone system to digital, right? Like they had a very old analog system. It was built in 1913, before the First World War. They were trying to rebuild it to upgrade it to 21st century, phone system. It ended up being a patchwork of old and new. It doesn't work very well. Why? Because you have all that infrastructure, right? And that infrastructure has an inertia, and you're not gonna. And some things are very hard to unscramble, right? So dismantling that infrastructure was as costly as building it anew. So you ended up with a patchwork of things that are new and old. At the same time, the country of Ghana in Africa was establishing their network, their phone network. They didn't have any. It was like they have maybe 10 phones in the country. So now they have the most advanced phone system, one of the most advanced phone system in the world. It's all digital. It's all based on satellite and cellular. And I'm not an expert, but it's really the most advanced. But that shows you we're not like Ghana. We're like France in this case. In other words, so we have inertia, we have structures, and we have structures that we need to maintain. But sometimes we need to try to think as if we were Ghana. I mean, and one of the things that bothers me is that maintaining that infrastructure, that old infrastructure, takes the best minds of our generation. I'm sure, like Rabbi, you're a fine thinker, and you're a deep thinker. I mean, the type of conversations we were having when we were preparing this were very deep and very thought provoking. And I think, and then I hung up and think, yeah, but does Rabbi have enough time to actually? How much of your time? And I'm using you as an example here, right? How much of your time is about maintaining the structure, the infrastructure, and how much of your time is about thinking and dealing with spiritual questions of your congregants and of yourself, right? And thinking and writing and teaching. So I think that's one of the problems we have, because like I was meeting with, and this is a true story, a person that I love, Arnie Eisen, who was the chancellor of the JTS, and one of the finest minds in our generation in terms of his halachic thinking, and I'm meeting with him, and he's talking to me about the air rights of the JTS building in New York. Now, it's great, right? They made a lot of money on selling the air rights, but I'm saying that's Arnie Eisen need to be talking to me about air rights, or he should be leading the conservative movement from the theological and spiritual way. And this is a conversation we have with him too, and he would love to be able to be doing that, right? But this inertia that you're describing, this need to maintain institutions, become in and of itself the priority and the way community leaders are judged by, right? Arnie Eisen ultimately, and I'm picking on him. I could take Rick Jacobs for that matter. I could take anybody. He's going to be judged about, did he balance the budget? Is he raise enough money? It's not going to be judged by his board in terms of how innovative his philosophy was, and that's problematic.
Absolutely. I'm reminded of that scene in the Coen brothers movie, A Serious Man,
Yes.
where they want to visit the rabbi and they can't get past the gatekeeper because the rabbi's thinking. And it's not something, with few exceptions, I understand that Gunther Plaut, one of kind of the luminaries in the Reformed Jewish world, had that time written into his contract. And yeah, it's an interesting way of doing business, and it's important.
But it's not just the contract. There is an element of social validation. What does the society, the Jewish community, value? Right? If we're gonna give social value to, for example, how much money we raise. I mean, I live in that world of raising money and giving money away, so I know it's important. I'm making it more extreme, but what is really that we value, right?
Absolutely. So on that question, I want to dive us into the weeds just a moment. We have a question from Lee Feldman, one of my congregants, which I ask now, even though it is a little bit more specific, but just as a model to remind everyone, we would love to get to engage with you in this conversation. So please add your comments to the chat box. Lee points out that we are at a time in American life where the stock market is at an all-time high, and that it seems like there might be not only more dollars available, but those appreciated securities, it might be in people's interest to start donating at a greater clip for tax purposes. And it also sparks in me the larger question of, how are you going about approaching funders? And how are you encouraging, what are you encouraging them to hold on to? And what are you encouraging them to jump into the here and now with?
Yeah. So hold on, let me try something because I hear. Can you hear me now?
You sound great on my end, and I apologize for any technological disruptions, but you sound good.
I'll do. I love hearing myself, so it's fine. I'll hear myself twice. Yes, I mean you're touching. That is one question that I could talk about it for forever. That's what I do every day. But I got to tell you a couple of things. You are absolutely right that there is a lot of philanthropic potential out there. There are not just a stock market. Like there's a lot of existing philanthropic assets in the Jewish community. My estimation is that there are around 120, probably more, $1 billion in Jewish philanthropic assets in the United States, and that's a very conservative estimate. Now, the problem is, and there's another opportunity and a risk at the same time, which is that we as a country are confronting the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of the human race. It's estimated that around $53 trillion are going to pass from one generation to the other. So that poses an enormous philanthropic opportunity, but it also poses a risk because we're not really getting to younger people as effectively as we reach older generations of givers. Now, it's not that they're not generous. Young people are very generous. It's that we just don't know how to approach them. So how do you approach a donor? First of all, you're not going to sell something. You're going to offer a partnership that is transformational for both sides. This is not just a semantic difference. This is a conceptual difference. You engage the donor fully. The donor today does not want to write a check. I mean, some might, and if they do, go for it, take the check. But in most cases, they want to be engaged. So if a donor is engaged, the sale pitch, it's redundant. You generally don't need to do it. If it's not engaged, the sales pitch is not going to help you. So there's no shortcut. There's no, I actually I'm asked a lot about what's the best fundraiser out there. I said the best fundraiser is a Jewish educator, meaning if I engage you with Judaism, if I engage you with the programs of the congregation, the JCC, the federation, so then you're going to give. If you're not engaged, you're not going to. Now, that's true for the older generation, but it's even more true for the younger generation. Young people don't have a loyalty. Like, something that you have to understand is that the concept of being loyal to an organization does not exist anymore. We surveyed our members, the JFN members, only 14%, 1/4, said that they give based on their organizational loyalty. Well, it's my responsibility, my parents gave, whatever, so I keep giving. 72% of them said that they give only based on impact. So that changes the conversation. It's not about why do I need your money? It's not about the great programs that I do. What the donor wants to hear is what is the impact that their dollars are having in the community. It's not funding stuff, it's solving problems, right? So the first thing is to say your contribution achieves this in the community. And I let you touch it and feel it and sort of engage with that contribution. So that's my first suggestion in terms of how to approach donor. The second thing is that to understand that philanthropy changed, right? Philanthropy is a much more diverse activity that it used to be. In the past, philanthropy was, as I said before, writing a check. Today, you have new mechanisms. You have giving circles. You have impact investing. You have social enterprise. You have a ton of things that didn't exist 20 years ago, right? And I think that whoever wants to approach donors effectively needs to be attuned not only to what they give to, but to how they give, and that's different. The last point I want to make is this. We don't own the donors. And we say we, I said organizations don't know, as I said before, there's no loyalty, but also the Jewish community doesn't own the donor, meaning Jews give to all sort of causes, not only Jewish causes. The percentage of Jews that give only to Jewish causes is, take a guess, 4%. In other words, 96% of Jews give to secular causes too. And they tend to give more to secular causes. So the question is, what do we do with that, right? Do we fight it? We can't fight it. Like that train left the station. And it's actually good that Jews are giving to secular causes too. But we can use those secular interests to engage Jews. Rather than guilt trip them into, oh, you're supporting more the non-Jews than you're supporting the Jews. We should say, what do you care about? You care about food justice. Okay, there's a Jewish organization called Mazon that does precisely that. Our congregation does a program for, I'm just inventing, right, for food safety in our neighborhood. Do you care about sustainability, climate change, whatever? There are plenty of Jewish ways to do that. So instead of judging that, you say, kol kavod, good for you that you're doing that. Have you thought of doing that with the Jewish lens? Right? And in most cases, people will say, yes, I'm really interested in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. You remind me of the writings of Professor Mark Dollinger from San Francisco State, who points out that in the progressive Jewish world, in some ways, we're victims of our own success. We've raised a generation on universal values, and then we get grumpy when they act upon those universal values. And indeed, we have to be thinking about it differently. And Tony Pardo, one of our board members, asks a question along those lines. He points out that synagogues can seem to some much more insular, right? We're not as attuned to, we're not the Mazon of the world. We're not the AJWS. We're not out solving the biggest pressing, urgent concerns. But sometimes supporting your local synagogue just isn't as sexy. how do, right, in addition to, an earlier part of the conversation where you mentioned in some ways synagogues have to be the aggregators, we have to be the collators of information, and I imagine there's a role for that in the philanthropic world as well. But I'm curious how you would respond to that kind of that interface between synagogues, which are the traditional building blocks of a strong Jewish community, when the donor base now has different priorities.
Right. That's an excellent question. I think that it is, and as all excellent questions, they don't have an easy answer. But part of what you said already is being an aggregator, being a curator of experiences, is one other way of bridging that, right? So my synagogue, for example, we partnered with, and I'm on the board of, I was on the board, not anymore, but so I sympathize with those on the board of your congregation. But one of the things we did was we try to partner with, for example, Repair the World, which is a Jewish organization that does service, to do social service, and we have a chapter of that in our synagogue. In other words, we didn't reinvent the wheel, but we don't have to. We can be, we don't compete with Repair the World. We partner with them. Like 20 years ago, we would have competed. We would have said, okay, let's have our own social justice, activity, our own tzedakah committee, and it wouldn't be mediocre, and people wouldn't have, But now we can actually partner with people. So if we see the synagogue as a platform, and by the way, that is true for every organization, not just synagogues. The organization of the 21st century is a platform. I mean, the successful organization of the 21st century is a platform. Think about Airbnb. Think about Uber. Uber is the biggest taxi company in the world, and it doesn't own a single car. What they own is the platform. Airbnb is the biggest lodging company in the world, and they don't own a single room, right? What they own is the platform. Now, with so many options in the world, a local synagogue can be a platform for engagement with different things. So that on the one hand, right? So that's how you quote unquote compete with those things. You don't. You actually, embrace them. You bear hug them. You include them. You partner with them, and your added value is to help individual Jews navigate the overwhelming amount of options that there are there. You got to tell them, we selected the best for you, and we partner with them, and we facilitate your engagement with those causes, right? So that's one way, like trying to see more your organization as a platform and not necessarily as something that has to provide every bit of program to compete with everybody in the world, because there's no limit to that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that a local synagogue has something that all these big organizations of these national structures don't have. You have the capacity of building community. All politics are local, or all communities are local, right? So, and especially in the post-COVID area, the notion of being a community, it's going to be important. The notion of helping folks navigate their spiritual questions is going to be important, right? Giving people back the sense of family, the sense of community is going to be very important. And you have to own that, and you have to use that as your selling point, right? We're not, and to understand that they're not opposed. The particular and the universal are not opposed. Like, that's the genius of Judaism, right? When we say Kiddush, and I'm going to get a little bit too philosophical here, but when we say Kiddush, we say Zecher leYetziat Mitzrayim, like remembrance of the Exodus, which is a particular experience of the Jews, and Zecher leMaaseh Bereshit, and remembrance of the creation of the world, right? Is the universal and the particular, and Judaism is about mixing the two things. An individual congregation has the same idea of try to mix the universal, the global with the local. You are the interface between individual people and the broad world. You can serve as a supporting structure that allows people and helps people connect with the world. People need both.
Absolutely. I am so grateful for your time. I have just one more question, although perhaps if somebody else asks another one, I'll try to squeeze that in as well. You have your finger on the pulse of the Jewish world outside of our insular community, and we strive to do many of the things that have already been discussed, although clearly we have a lot more work to do, as so many others. But having your pulse on that larger presence in the Jewish world, I'm curious what you're hearing. What are you hearing? What are you fearing? What does the immediate future hold for us?
I tell you what keeps me up at night. There's a number of things that keep me up at night, but one is what I said before: the lack of spiritual renewal and the lack of thinking, the lack of ideas. That keeps me up at night, because I think that if we don't address that, we're hollowing out Judaism, and I think there's no enough realization of that. That is one thing. The other thing that keeps me up at night is the level of polarization and internal division that I see in the Jewish community, and that plays itself in many different ways. It plays itself between Israel and the diaspora. It plays itself within the American Jewish community. It gets me wondering if we still are one community, right? And we may not be, and we may be at one of these points in history where there's going to be a break, and Judaism had breaks in the past, and I hope it doesn't, right? I hope we can find common things, but I think that we're not doing a good job in isolating ourselves from the polarization and the extremism of the outside world. I think that Rabbi Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, said, the world is torn between a far left that wants a utopia that can never be, and a far right that wants to go back to a past that never existed. Right, so and we're caught in the middle, and our inability to, we're caught also in the middle between, a tendency towards total universalism, the model of particular identities are irrelevant. Like, you can't have a particular, you have to be a complete humanist, and your only allegiance is to humanity as a whole and to the oppressed of the world and whatever. That is a universalism that negates the particular identity. On the other hand, you have a tribal nationalism and ethnocentric that doesn't really have any content, right? It's just about hating the other. It's just about, primal tribalism, right? Now, and we're in the middle, trying to find our bearings between these two very vocal extremes, right? So I think that if you ask me, that's a big challenge, and it's a big challenge, and I know it's not what most people want to hear. Most people want to hear about, how do I raise more money? How do I keep the JCC going? The truth is that without that, all the rest becomes irrelevant, right? I'm really fearful of the disappearance of spaces, of the public square of the Jewish community. That happens in the United States as well. There's no places where we share the same corpus of data and the same conceptual world, right? And there's no places where we meet each other, right? There's a great book that talks about public libraries and parks being the last places where Americans of all stripes meet together, and it's disappearing too. Right, the line of Disneyland was the ultimate democratizing experience in the United States. Everybody stood in line in Disneyland, right? The rich, the poor, the black, the white. Well, not anymore. If you have money, you pay the fast track, or you get the. So we're missing spaces where we can. And in the Jewish community, we're having the same. Like, we don't have a public square. And I think that building that public square is going to be very important. That doesn't mean accepting extremists and bigots, and I mean, a big tent still has flaps, right? And people are outside of the tent, and that's fine. But for the overwhelming majority that is in between these two extremes, there's no place where they can meet and strengthen the commonality instead of being pushed to the echo chambers of the extremes.
Thank you. It is a lot to chew on for me, for the congregation's leadership, for the congregation's members, as we think about using this time of COVID-19 to not only make sure that we survive, though I'm grateful to everyone who is helping ensure that continuity, but also thinking about who we need to be on the other end. There is an end to this, God willing, may it come soon, B'mei Amenu. But when we get there, who do we need to be? What do we need to be doing? And how can we be there for the next iteration of the Jewish community is really important to be thinking about. I so appreciate your pushing us in that direction.
Yeah, and the thing that I would say to that is, as a point of optimism, is that, we're a people with a 4,000-year history. Whatever history can throw at us, we've been there before. We've been through worse. So this is a challenge, but it's not we can do it. We dealt with worse and more difficult challenges when we were weaker, poorer, and smaller. So we're privileged in the sense that we get to face these challenges with the safety, the resources, the power that we have today. That is also unprecedented in our 4,000 years of history.
Absolutely. Andres Bokoini, President, CEO of the Jewish Funders Network, I am grateful to you for your time, for your thoughtfulness, for joining us this Shabbat. I'm grateful to the Sejewitz Endowment Fund that helped create this evening. Thank you so much for your time, and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, and thank you all. Thank you for all you do, guys.